Alright, what's good YouTube? So for those who don't know, evil, like dark, sinister, without warning X beats are like my thing. Not only are they my favorite types of beats to make, but they're also the ones that I'd like to say I'm best at making. I've been imitating and making beats in these styles for like years now, and so in this tutorial, I'm basically going to be going over everything that I've learned so you can make the most evil sounding beats possible. Also, before this video starts, make sure to follow my Instagram and Twitter at FinnaFinesse, as well as check out my new drum and loop kit, Demonic Volume 1, which I'm about to release. It's like a without warning inspired kit full of drums, loops, and like FX dedicated to these types of beats in particular. It's fire, trust me, and it's like the only drum kit that you're gonna need when making these types of beats. Also, I'll be giving away a copy of it almost every day on my Instagram, so that's another reason to go check that out. But yeah, let's get into the video. So right off the bat, I'm just gonna give you like a little breakdown of everything you need to know. For starters, we're only gonna use the C sharp and D sharp scales because they're by far the two most used types of scales when making these types of beats. You can use any scale you want, honestly, at the end of the day, but like it's gonna come down to sound preference, but I highly recommend starting with these because they're usually the best ones for these types of beats. But most important, if you're really trying to get like the darkest possible sound, you want to use these like figurine scales, which basically what that is when you take the second note in the scale and you just pitch it down one. Honestly, now that I think of it, you should probably stick to those scales more so because they're really what's best for like making these dark kind of beats. Also, high hitting 808s for these types of beats do not fly. You want to stay in the lower octaves with the root notes of your melodies being in between stuff like F sharp 5 to B4, because that's usually where the 808 is going to hit best and give it like that dark feel without being like too muddy. Which, speaking of, the most fundamental thing to understand for these types of beats is that evil melodies begin with like one semitone gaps between each notes, because that's like what creates tension in music theory. Like for example, why do you think themes like for example Jaws or like Halloween are so effective at creating that tension? Well, it's because they're literally just like one note gap melodies. Also, if you watch the Metro tutorial, you're already in the know this, but basically like almost every evil beat in the same way is made around this particular chord progression. So generally it's good practice to like start with it, which just by looking at it, it doesn't look all that complex, but you know, you're gonna see that later on that the main takeaway from this is that like, it's really hard to be super creative when making these types of beats because you're really restricted about like through music theory, like what works and what doesn't. So like, since we're gonna be so strict on those things, we're gonna have to like compensate for creativity by like adding like effects and unique sounds and transitions. You'll see, I'll explain it later in the video, but so I could sit here and show you this by like making a beat, but instead I'd rather just break down some evil beats that I made to really like emphasize on these points well. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna make a quick evil beat. Give me like a minute. Okay, so time, 9 minutes. I don't even like this beat to be honest, but I'm just trying to prove a point. So I'd say this is like a really dark beat, but it doesn't have that like same like without warning kind of feel. It's much more like a trap feel. So I'm gonna like break down basically like the key things that you need to do different with your beats to really differentiate it from just a dark or evil sounding trap beat to a full on like without warning Halloween type beat. Okay, so the main thing that's gonna make that difference is effects. For like drum sounds, lots of reverb, like reverb on claps and snares works really well, as well as like rim shots. Honestly, reverb in general on like most melodic sounds is pretty important. You know, you want it to sound like it's being recorded in some like dark basement or something. So for these types of beats, cassette and RC20 for more of a vintage sound, way more so RC20 though, are like literally something you should be putting on like everything. And I know that's kind of like a meme at this point, but like I say with like drum sounds, VSTs, presets, or anything producers are using, if everyone's using it basically, that probably means because there's a reason. Like everyone's using it because it works. So like don't be afraid to use RC20 just because everyone else is doing it. So yeah, it's just gonna make everything just sound so much more vintage and warm, which is like really something we want to go for. Specifically for these types of beats, my favorite presets are the No More Boring Pads and the VHS preset, which in my opinion is the best one. As far as reverbs go, Valhalla Vintage Verb is really the best one, but also like Fruity Reverb works and does just fine, you know, so use either or. And honestly, that's all you need to know for effects. It's really just about like knowing how to utilize your reverb properly in all your sounds, as well as knowing how to like properly use emulators to make your melody sound a little bit more vintage. And honestly, that's all you need to know for effects. Just do note that when you're using like a lot of sounds with a lot of reverb and effects, it's very important that you stay efficient with your headspace and like your frequency range. So make sure to like properly EQ your sounds beforehand so you can like eliminate those little bits of reverb that are just gonna overlap and cause muddiness if you don't. Okay, so now let's go over what I think is the most important part of this, and that's structuring. This is really gonna end up coming down to preference, but generally the types of effects that tend to be used for these types of beats are like laughs, dark one-shots, sirens, or like like Halloween related sounds, and they're usually used to tell the listener when the beat is changing. So what I mean by that is they'll usually be hitting on the one, kind of like a crash at the chorus, beginning of the song, or like towards the end of it. I would say though, if you are sampling your own sounds, then definitely EQ out the high ends and like add some sort of reverb. Really just want to prioritize making it so it sits far in the distance instead of like on top of or with everything else. I remember I once heard like London on the track describe it like you want to put like super quiet FX in the background of your beat, because it's not only going to make it feel more full, but it's almost like you're going to like feel it instead of like actually hearing it, and it's just going to like add to the vibe that you're going for with your track.
This is a certified home classic.
Also, for the melodies, try introducing like basic melodic sounds in and out of your beats to keep them a little bit more interesting. But do note, for those who did see the Metro tutorial, you know what I'm about to say, keep it basic. You know, you don't want to have like some super complex melody just being brought in and out, because a super complex melody is going to mess with the original rhythm that's set from the beat, and it's just going to throw the listener off. But yeah, let's talk about VSTs and presets. As for like the types of sounds that you want to use, it's really important that you use a lot of like dry bells, like mallet sounds, dark and vintage strings, weird sine pads and like old analog pads. Dark and dry guitars work really well. Dark like Moog bass sounds works really well too. And of course, lots of dark evil FX to make it sound like it's something straight out of a horror movie. As for the VSTs, Omnisphere by far is the best one. It's great for just about like anything analog or like vintage sounding. And that's really a goal here for what we're trying to go for. It's also great for just about any of these sounds I just listed. I know the default plugin Sakura, or whatever the hell it's called, I know it's probably wrong, but like Sakura is really good for like string sounds, like super like vintage string sounds. I know Rap Save Me was actually like a reversed melody from like a preset that was made there. Sadly, I lost the FLP for the remake, but Ogun is also like a crazy underrated plugin because it has some like insane bell sounds that I know Metro has used in previous beats of his. Also, Expand 2 is really good for like bells and mallets, as well as like soft pads. Also, Analog Lab, I don't have it installed right now, but Analog Lab is also really good for like vintage synthesizer sounds. Also, here's a little like secret plugin that I use a lot that's really good for these types of beats. It's called Mtron Pro. It's an emulator of the Mellotron. It has some really cool like vintage stuff in it, and if you're like really good with FX like myself, for example, you can be like really effective at creating that evil sound with it just by like adding like reverbs and like RC20s and vintage verbs and stuff like that. And finally, Contact has some really cool like mallets, guitars, and like dark synths and strings. My favorites are the Attic 2, Mallet Flux, Jade Ethnic Orchestra, the Giant, and like practically all the Spitfire string libraries. Okay, so now let's talk about effects. So as far as drum sounds go, really just want to use like the generic trap drum sounds that everyone really has, because you know they work very well together. And the only thing that's worth really noting about these types of beats for the drums is that like the 808s tend to be a little bit like louder, and the claps tend to be a little bit lower than like a normal beat, let's say. Also, using rim shots instead of like a snare, especially one with like a bit of reverb on it, will help a lot to give it that like really raw Halloween feel. Also, as for your 808s, also I'd say the same general rule with the drums. Stick to the most like generic trap drum sounds. Spins, Zay, Lex 808s, they're all going to do good for you in these types of beats. Finally, let's talk about my favorite part of this, and that's the outro / transitions. Metro does these a lot with his beats, and there's really kind of like a secret to how he creates them. The key is to first record the melodic components of your melody into a WAV file, and then tweak with it within the FL editor. Most of the time, Metro just reverses the melodies and like pitches them down to a whole octave. You can hear this on tracks like Space Cadet and No Complaints where he does this. Also, sometimes he'll put like some sort of pitch shifter or automation with gross beat as an effect on it as well. And then finally, what you can also try doing is like adding like a sub bass or deep bass line to it. Some case, a whole new melody altogether may work. Okay, so when he's not using the presets Prid sidechain bass from Nexus or Moog Taurus super subs from Omnisphere, what he does is he just takes any 808 that fits, opens Edison, selects a small part of the 808, and then trims it and sets it as a loop. And just like that, you have your own custom sub bass that you can use. Okay, so with both these tricks combined in this beat that I just made, as well as some other sample tracks where I did the same thing, it now sounds like this. I actually found some of the exact 808s I used for subs when making Without Warning. And you know, if you want any of them, again, they're all going to be in my demonic drum kit, so please buy it. And yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. If you want to hear the full beat, check it out my new beat channel at jmizzy, which is a name that I'm also gonna probably change soon, so link in the description for that. Which, speaking of changing names, I'm gonna be rebranding this channel from FinnaFinesse to like jmizzy or Finna the God. I haven't decided which one yet, but the reason being is that like I don't want this channel to be based on like a brand, but rather have it be more personal to me. And I just feel more comfortable with those names, specifically like jmizzy, because I've been using that since I started making beats, as well as the fact that I just like the name more. But you know, feel free to call me whatever you want. But yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that Instagram and Twitter will still remain Finna the God, so go check those out. Again, giveaway for my kits are going to be on Instagram, so go enter that. And yeah, I'll see you guys in a few days. Peace.